It all started with a discreet, private envelope that was completely unexpected. However, when Joni Lamb saw the letter from a trusted friend and longtime minister, everything changed. She wasn't only shocked by the words inside. They revealed a deep fissure in the inner circle of Daystar. The minister is now shocked by what should have remained a secret. Is this the beginning of a negative attitude that nobody anticipated? You will be shocked by what you read. It started. Keep quiet. It was merely a personal decision taken by a widow who is still grieving and attempting to move on. There was no significant announcement or news release. However, in the years that followed, it emerged as one of the most discussed topics in Christian media. Joni Lamb, the late Marcus Lamb's wife, spent many years contributing to the development of Daystar Television. She recently made a choice that will fracture the community that had supported her for decades and rock the church she helped create. In November 2023, Marcus Lamb passed away. Many people, not just his, were deeply saddened by his passing, for the whole Daystar network and its global audience. As co-hosts and partners in business, family, and faith, Marcus and Joni have been leaders together for nearly 30 years. Their friendship garnered a lot of attention and represented togetherness, purpose, and calling for many spectators. Many assumed that once Marcus passed away, Joni would take some time to grieve, take a break, and allow the church and herself to recover. A few months later, however, everything was different. Joni announced to everyone that same year's late summer that she was getting married to Dr. Doug Weiss, is a Christian psychologist and preacher. Soon after, they were married. The time frame startled more people than just fans. Mission partners, other leaders, and close friends were likewise taken aback. It moved far too quickly. Then came the letter. Joni received a letter from a genuine person, not just a reviewer, over Thanksgiving 2023. She was a widow herself, a friend, and a preacher. She understood the sadness of losing someone in the ministry. It wasn't composed to embarrass or it attacked, but it didn't hold back. It was straightforward, sincere, and really moved me. The letter was about more than just timing. Many people shared the writer's sentiments, but they hadn't publicly asked, why so quickly? Why so publicly? And most importantly, had Joni thought about how this would affect the people who looked to her for spiritual leadership? The fact that she got engaged and remarried so soon after Marcus's death made it hard for many to figure out how to balance her own happiness with the expectations of Christian leadership. People, particularly young Christians, bereaved families, and those who looked to Joni as a spiritual leader, began to doubt the example she was leading. Personal decisions are temporary in the ministry. Additionally, every action you take as the spokesperson for a worldwide Christian network conveys a message. Despite being very emotional and personal, Joni's choice has gone viral. Not only were they astonished, but they were also perplexed and even offended. Some believed it conveyed the incorrect message. The speed at which the situation shifted, from widespread concern to candid discussion, startled several. The marriage was discussed in Christian news sources, social media posts, and internet forums. Not as gossip, but because it raised important issues. How, for instance, should Christian leaders manage interpersonal connections following a spouse's passing? Is there an ideal waiting period? What does it mean to strike a balance between one's own personal recovery and one's civic duty? One thing became evident as the tempest intensified: the consequences of making private decisions in public, particularly by spiritual leaders, extend much beyond the immediate moment. Remarriage was only one aspect of this. Other factors were leadership, timing, trust, and the weight of influence. Even though it's widely acknowledged that no one can truly comprehend another person's suffering, this fact could not be disregarded. When the news of Joni Lamb's second marriage broke, many people assumed that the criticism would largely remain external. They assumed that people would discuss it on social media and perhaps engage in a few private discussions. But as time passed, it became evident that her own family members were causing the most suffering, not outsiders. The mission of Daystar has never been limited to a single ministry. To the Lambs, Marcus and Joni worked together to build their family, which is their life's work. Their kids grew up behind the scenes, on set, and eventually in front of the camera over the years. People celebrated their milestones, laughed at their family moments, and watched them grow. The most well-known and involved member of the ministry was their son, Jonathan Lamb. He was seen by many as Marcus's logical heir, the person who would continue his legacy when the time came. That's why the next event was so startling. When Joni got married again, a lot of people were taken aback. After her second marriage, there was increasing friction between Joni and Jonathan, according to multiple stories, including a letter from a concerned pastor friend. What had appeared to be a loyal and easy transfer of the torch was suddenly becoming something far more difficult and agonizing. The letter clarified that Jonathan's role, or lack thereof, in Daystar's future was the primary cause of the issue. Many believed that Jonathan would play a more important role following Marcus's passing. Staff and spectators revered Jonathan, who had long served as a leader in the ministry. But it appeared that the leadership dynamic began to change against Jonathan as Joni's friendship with Doug Weiss grew increasingly serious. According to reports, tensions increased behind the scenes as Joni started to strongly promote Doug both publicly and inside the ministry hierarchy. Although Doug was a new member of the Daystar community and was well respected as a Christian, speaker and counselor, several employees and family members thought he was being thrust into a leadership position without merit. After that, Jonathan lost the trust of many. The letter claims that he was pressured by his mother and a close friend named Tom to openly endorse her remarriage and the ensuing leadership changes. According to insiders, he was asked to speak for the ministry and family, which required him to support decisions that he didn't quite agree with. This was a difficult circumstance for someone who was already suffering the loss of his father. He respected and loved his mother on the one hand. However, he felt compelled to encourage her to be married again. He claimed to have felt excluded, unheard, and even forced out of the ministry he had devotedly served for years. For the Lamb family, what many believed would be a period of healing and unity swiftly devolved into awkward public appearances, emotional distancing, and odd connections behind the scenes. Members of the SAF also began to notice the difference. Daystar's longtime staff, many of whom had known the Lamb family for years, were now discussing growing tensions. Some claimed that things had changed at work. Where is Jonathan? Several people said softly, "Why can't I see him as much anymore?" Jobs weren't the only thing at stake. It concerned leaving a legacy, and if Marcus's foundation would continue to serve as the foundation for the ministry, or if relationships and individual decisions would have a greater influence. According to some, family-run businesses are particularly vulnerable to this type of issue. When leadership is handed down from one generation to the next, it can be difficult to distinguish between a spiritual calling and familial devotion. Should a leader be inherited should it be a family company? Or should it always be founded on God's purpose, calling, and character? For Daystar, this question was crucial. Jonathan had dedicated his entire life to preparing to contribute to the realization of the concept. However, it appeared like Joni had different plans now that Doug Weiss was the protagonist. She seems to have lost her relationship with her own kid as a result of these thoughts. The letter Joni received was extremely clear about this. As a fellow widow and personal friend, the author described it as heartbreaking. She was concerned that Joni had prioritized her own demands over her family's, particularly her children's and grandchildren's emotional and spiritual needs. Going in this manner, she added, might harm family relationships and the ministry's reputation for years to come. Concerns were also raised concerning Daystar's future leadership. When Doug was portrayed as a spiritual voice on the network, many supporters were unaware of what was happening. Was he in command now? Was he in command along with Joni? What will become of Jonathan? After years of service, would he gently step down? Confusion was exacerbated by the public's lack of explanation. For missions like Daystar, trust is just as vital as money. Have faith that those in authority are acting morally, rather than just what suits them. The rapid transformation in the family's relationship was unexpected and even upsetting to some who had followed the Lamb family for decades. While all of this was going on, for the most part, Jonathan has kept to himself. He rarely speaks in public, and when he does, it's generally with grace and flair. However, many close to him claim he has been profoundly affected. Some even claim that his silence speaks louder than his words, since they interpret it as a protest in a circumstance that is too unpleasant to confront in public. As the dust settles, many individuals are still unsure of what will happen next. Will things improve for the Lamb family? Many people thought Jonathan would take the role, but will he ever do it? Or is the window closed? Will Doug Weiss continue to serve as Daystar's leader? Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, is it possible for the mission to continue without mending the family's profound wounds? Without a doubt, family loyalty and spiritual direction can cause severe and protracted harm to one another. There is a genuine chance that the ministry that began as one in which everyone collaborated to achieve a common objective will disintegrate from the inside out. For those who witnessed Daystar's transformation from a modest program to a global network, it's difficult to watch this part. It also serves as a powerful reminder of something simple and true. The ministry cannot expand if the mission's family begins to quarrel. Recuperation must begin at home. Otherwise, anything built on top of it might collapse. There was a lot of shock and misunderstanding following Joni Lamb's abrupt remarriage. However, many Christians found a certain aspect of the story much more disturbing than the time. Her public defense of her decision by citing her personal destiny. For Joni was regarded as a powerful voice in Christian media for many years. She publicly prayed, advocated for biblical principles, and spoke words of encouragement to millions of people. When she remarried just a few months after losing her first husband, Marcus Lamb, many people were prepared to give her some space. People suffered in different ways. The goal was to avoid making a snap decision. But when Joni revealed to everyone that her new relationship with Doug Weiss was supported by prophetic words, everything changed. During those periods, discussions behind the scenes got better. Time was no longer the only consideration. It was time to discuss spiritual accountability, a sensitive topic that has long sparked controversy and resentment in many churches. On multiple occasions, Joni spoke in public about how certain people had informed her that Doug was destined to be her husband through signs or messages from God. She talked of trusting those who believed the Lord was guiding her in that direction, having dreams, and being at peace with herself. Furthermore, despite the fact that charismatic Christians typically search for or give prophetic counsel, many people had serious concerns about the way this was handled. It appeared to those outside the circumstance that she was defending a very human decision with mystical words, one that has already caused division. For those who knew her well, such as the priest who penned that well-known letter, however, it went far deeper. It was risky in addition to being awful. Although the minister who wrote the letter did not accuse Joni of lying or acting, she did provide a strong warning about what she described as self-deception previously. Leaders who exploited prophecy to make it look sacred, but were actually just following their emotions, loneliness, or desires, even though they truly believed they were following God. It was one of the hardest tendencies to deal with, and one of the most sad in ministry. Joni was informed by the pastor that true prophecy should never occur on its own. It must always be compared to the Bible, sound counsel, the appropriate moment, and the outcome. The feeling that a word has isn't always accurate. Saying, "I feel, God told me," does not imply that it is true. The message is accurate. Accordingly, the Bible advises us to carefully examine the spirits and their words. People, especially public leaders, must be responsibility for this. The preacher believed that Joni's faith in the prophetic was excessive in this instance because it aligned too well with her pre-existing plans. It meant that humans needed to be intelligent, but it didn't imply that God wasn't involved. In the II letter, It was questioned if Joni had actually sought out spiritual guidance and support, or if she had simply surrounded herself with voices who were prepared to bless her choice. There was one instance that struck close to home for many believers. Not only did renowned speaker and pastor Jimmy Evans introduce Joni to Doug, but he also publicly supported the relationship and allegedly disparaged Doug's previous marriage. It felt more like a public justification of a personal decision than a spiritual journey because of that, and Joni's reliance on the prophet's endorsement. In the domain of charm, this created a silent storm. Discussions were held, occurring in meetings of leaders, clubs, and small groups. Churchgoers were challenging their pastors with difficult questions. What time does a vision occur? At what point does it feel that way? How can we distinguish between the two? In actuality, many spiritual communities consider prophecy to be a very significant and highly prized skill. However, it can also be misused, particularly if no one keeps an eye on it. The church has witnessed numerous instances of leaders making significant decisions about anything from marriage to the church. Over the years, divides to make financial decisions according to what they claimed were divine directives. Those words were true in some cases. They occasionally caused a great deal of harm. What's incorrect isn't the forecasting itself. That's what happens when we utilize it as a blank check for anything we want. That's the point of failure. Because of this, the letter covered more ground than merely Joni's marriage. It concerned how she had performed her spiritual guiding role of discernment. Many longtime Daystar viewers became even more concerned as a result of this. What is the reason for the leaders of a large church using prophecy as a shield so quickly? To the millions of Christians watching around the globe, what message does that convey? In terms of responsibility, wisdom, or godly leadership, what does it say? The letter provided the leadership with a proposition that was tough, yet kind. Take a step back to give yourself time to reflect, not as a form of punishment. Spend some time reflecting on the events and statements made in God's name, if it had been handled according to biblical principles. This has nothing to do with public humiliation or disgrace. It had to do with spiritual maturation. The question is not what to say or think, but rather what true spiritual direction looks like when things go wrong and life becomes chaotic. And that's what this is all about. The type that says, maybe I got ahead of God. Maybe I need to pause. For many years, Joni Lamb has been a powerful, devout, and significant voice. The good she has done is undeniable. As a leader, how you respond to difficult situations is more important than how high you climb. Furthermore, citing prophecy to justify a decision is not only a warning sign in the church community. You have to be incredibly humble now. People believe when someone says, "God told me," because they listen. They come after. Furthermore, it's not only an error if that word causes individuals to feel negatively about their morality, faith, or selves. This is a crucial responsibility that possesses long-lasting effects. You must fear the Lord in order to employ vision, not merely out of convenience. It demands community rather than isolation. Furthermore, Jesus should always come first, not our desires. Many people are hoping that what began as a scandal would become something positive as this tale progresses. It is important for all leaders to keep in mind that spiritual power and accountability go hand in hand, because when it's not, even the most honest choices can go tragically wrong. One thing was unavoidable despite the engagement, the hasty remarriage, the bewildered public, the wounded family, and the letter from a concerned clergyman. It was not merely a question of time. It was more than just marriage. It wasn't even about prophecy or being a leader. It has to do with humility. When the dust settled and the conversation shifted from replies to genuine introspection, that was the term that appeared repeatedly. Show humility, the kind without stage lights, microphones, or news releases. The letter he received was about the type of person who prays by themselves, looks in the mirror, and asks God to help him make amends if he has missed something. The purpose was not to put her down, despite the fact that it was full of unpleasant facts. It was about returning her to something more significant. The writer wasn't your average preacher. She had experienced sadness herself and had lost a husband. Someone who understood how difficult it is to go on when the person you spent your entire life with breaks up with you. Therefore, she didn't write with a cold, hard mind. Her writing was filled with love, sadness, and a silent hope that Joni would pause and consider more than just her new marriage. The family's resentment, the leadership's perplexity, the agitated onlookers, and the profound spiritual significance of it all. Joni was asked to undertake something dangerous in the wall. Letter. It wasn't because she was in trouble, not because she didn't succeed, but because sometimes the best thing a leader can do is to step back, to take a big breath and cry, yet not to give up, to once more hear God free from the cacophony. Take some time off from preaching in public. It was proposed in this manner. Let others take the lead. Hold off till the dust settles. Quit being so angry. Let's create space to aid in healing, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. The letter subtly alluded to her son Jonathan in the same sentence. Jonathan knew Daystar's mission, pulse, and audience better than anybody else because he had grown up there. For years, he had served in silence, always doing his parents' job, but never being late. He had the knowledge, the heart, and perhaps now the opportunity to lead. Allowing Jonathan to take the lead would not be weak. It would be love. It would be a present. In this manner, Joni might declare, "This ministry is bigger than me." If she lived up to that statement, it would have a greater impact than any post, show, or lecture. Because this is the reality. Every corporation must eventually make a decision. A period when things break due to conflict, change, growth, or loss. The future and the individuals in authority are shaped by what happens next. For Daystar, this was one of those moments. Nobody was anticipating perfection. They begged for genuine leadership, kindness, and clarity. A boss who doesn't push others aside to flaunt their pride or hide behind titles. The kind who always prioritizes others, especially family, over their own objectives, listens, prays, and owns up to mistakes when needed. There are numerous instances of things going wrong in the ministry. The very thing that was supposed to assist others crumbled under the weight of pride. Platforms became fortresses, egos surpassed intelligence, and leaders were overly devoted to their positions. But that's not required. The letter to Joni was not just about what had gone wrong. It was about the positive outcomes that were yet possible. An opportunity to rebuild, to safeguard the foundation she and Marcus had established, to restore damaged connections, and to demonstrate to the world that service, not command, is the best kind of leadership. Reversing course may not imply permanent departure. It simply means creating space for God to speak once more, for healing to occur, and for silence to prevail, not from outside sources or based on what the prophet said voice, but in the secret places where true faith resides. One thing that many leaders seldom do is pause with such force. The defense continues till the last minute. They continue to move, converse, and fight. However, humility says, maybe I need to stop. Maybe I need to ask some hard questions. Maybe I need to give others room to lead too. And that sort of humility would affect viewers more than any show or sermon, both inside the family and globally. Have faith in those who grew up with Daystar, wept with the Lamb family over Marcus's passing, and supported them throughout their spiritual journey. Truth, consistency, and a ministry that lived out its teachings were what they sought, not scandal or drama. If humility is at the core, that is still achievable. This is about spiritual well-being, legacy, and the next generation, not about public image, but about the Lamb family and the viewers who are curious about what true leadership looks like. Cameras and content aren't the only things that matter. You also need to consider how you treat people, cope with grief, adapt to change, and be willing to give up even if it means losing something. The letter offered a path forward but did not provide easy answers. And there's a pause in the beginning. Therefore, What will happen next is the question at hand, not what has already happened. Will this be another scandal in the ministry that fades away? Forgiveness and grace are always welcome, but that portion of the story is still being written. Will it mark a sea change when humility emerges and something better, healthier, and more holy replaces it?